let's talk about Tony Kline and why his name came up in the Delphi case. I laid out a theory the other day. I'm not stuck to that. I have lots of issues with it. Main one being 3 people is a lot of people to be there that day. And folks, Tony is a free man. As far as we know, there is nothing to put him at the scene that day or at this stage, nothing concrete for any involvement at all. If there was, you would have to imagine he would be arrested by now. He might have nothing at all to do with it. However, it now seems extremely unlikely that Kegan knew nothing about it. And if Kegan knows, I believe Tony knew. Whether he was there that day or not is a different story, but when you consider the devices, the internet search history, the Vegas trip, when you consider who Tony is as a person and his history, it's very hard for me to believe that Kegan was there that day, but Tony wasn't. Or at least Tony has no involvement at all. It's very hard to believe that for me. So what is Tony's dirty secrets and why are people even talking about him? Tony first came to people's attention at the end of last year when the Anthony Shots profile was linked to the case. December the 7th, Indiana State Police made a statement on the Anthony Shots profile, and on December 9th, 2 days later, Kegan Kline was interviewed with Barbara MacDonald, where he places the phones in Tony's hands. But in this interview, he says he was with him the day of the murders and that they weren't there, they were in Peru. This was a big shift from August 2020 when Kegan Kline was arrested and first interviewed. We have the transcripts of that interview, we have the transcripts of Barbara MacDonald's interview. There's a huge shift there from at the very start, Kegan doesn't even want to talk about Tony. The investigators are throwing Tony down his throat. He won't go near it. He's terrified. Whereas a year and a half in prison does a lot, and all of a sudden in December, Kegan is yapping about Tony. And we also know a couple of weeks previously, around November 2021, Tony's home was raided. For Tony's home to be raided, they would have to have probable cause. That probable cause, more than likely, in my opinion only, came from something Kegan said. Did they find anything there? I don't think so, because again, Tony's a free man. But it would have been very, very different to the original raid on the Kline home in February 2017, because that raid was for CSAM and devices, whereas I suspect the raid in November 2021 was related to the Delphi murders, so they're very different search warrants and very different how they will be executed. And the things they can gather, they can basically take anything that they think might be related to the scene, whereas originally they're just looking for devices really. And just quickly back to that original search in 2017 when the Kline home was raided for CSAM, a very interesting comment was made. When the FBI raided the Kline home, Kegan and Tony were just back from Vegas, and Kegan says, this is in documents, that he was fucked and he should have left. He said he packed another bag and took it to Vegas, and he was going to, I think, leave the house and go back to Vegas when he was asleep. So why was Kegan waiting until he was asleep? We can assume that he is Tony. There's only 2 of them in the house. And it kind of jumps out that Kegan is afraid of something. Again, from the documents on Kegan, we learned about one of the profiles that he was using. It was a profile found on one of the devices taken in the raid. A young female called stepsister in the document. However, it is not the stepsister. It is not the real stepsister. This is Tony or Kegan. And conversations were found on that device talking about having sex with Kegan and her father at the same time. There's no context. So you can kind of see here now why people had eyes on Tony, because he's mentioned straight away in a few documents from Kegan. So obviously people dived straight into Tony to see what kind of man he is. Is there any record there? Yes, there is. There's a lot. There's small ones being like he robbed from, I think, a Pizza Hut a couple of years back. Just a misdemeanor. But then there's some very interesting things. In June 2005, we didn't know the woman at the time, but we knew there was battery against a woman around the same age as him. He touched her in an appropriate way. He beat her, hit her, 6 witnesses, and one of those witnesses was the victim's 11-year-old daughter. He did this in public as well, so this wasn't a behind closed doors type of situation. He was arrested, he got bailed, there was a court order for no weapons and a court order to stay away from the woman. The following month, she had to go back and get an order for her daughter. She needed it because Tony was stalking the child. It was an afternoon, I think after school, in the summer. Kline and another man saw her on a bike, followed her, stalked her, watched her. We have court documents. A court has said that stalking did occur and Kline was a threat, and it granted a protective order for the 11-year-old. So people were like, whoa, what's going on here? Who is Tony Kline? You violence against women, intimidating a child, and big anger issues. We jump forward again. It was 2008, 2009. A load of women started getting really creepy calls. At least 2, anyway, that we know of. Tony was calling them up, masturbating on the phone to them, breathing down the phone. And they kind of suspected that Tony was up to this. Went to the police, they got his phone records, and he admitted it. He had nowhere to go. He was like, yeah, I was doing that. They told him stop. He didn't stop. Kept going, kept escalating, until eventually he was arrested for harassment. And you see an escalation here in Tony. He's forcing women to become part of his sexual fantasy. It's all still non-contact, but we see an escalation. We learned about Tony's stepdaughter. She said she wanted to speak up. She wanted to tell people how Tony is. She has early memories of being young, Tony snapping, punching her in the face when she was just 4 years old. He punched a 4-year-old child in the face, and she has a picture of that. She has a picture of her at 4 years old with a black eye. She was terrified of Tony. She said he would beat the shite out of her for just breathing wrong. There was one time Tony didn't like what her mother was cooking for dinner, so he put her hands in the oven, burning them. She told us a story about one night when the neighbours were over at dinner. She said someone made a joke and Tony just snapped, got up, flipped the table in front of everyone. She said Kegan was the favourite. He never got touched. She called him a textbook sociopath. And then she gave one very chilling example of when they were younger. Tony was outside with a BB gun. He told her to start running and he said, I'm going to shoot you. He gave her a 5-second head start. He shot her in the elbow. She had to go to A&E and get surgery. I think they lied and said it was some accident or something. But here you see Tony again, terrifying a child and stalking them, hunting them. Tony has killed animals in front of her. He was a control freak. When he would come home from work, he would sit in the recliner and make Gwen take off his shoes and socks. In the mornings, he would make her put them back on. She said he's capable of anything. And the domestic violence sounded horrific here. Tony would get locked up for it. He would come home and then just beat on her again. She gave another example of when she broke her leg. She broke her leg because, again, Tony was hunting and stalking her. He was chasing her on a bike. She climbed a tree, fell and broke her leg. We have pictures of that broken leg also when she was young. And there's other stuff there as well that the stepsister said. I'll link the video here. I just want to keep this focused on Tony. Then we learned about Bart, the stepbrother. Tony was the person he called dad for half his childhood. He knows him very well. And he called him the worst person he has ever known. His childhood was full of fear, full of terror, and is pretty open and blunt about Tony being an evil person. A totally different man behind closed doors, a control freak. If they were in a room together and wanted to get up and get a drink from the fridge, they would have to ask Tony's permission. If they wanted to get a glass of water, they would have to ask Tony's permission. If they didn't, it would result in violence. plates being smashed, his sister being thrown off walls. He has memories of Tony beating his mother very, very bad. Broke her nose on one occasion. He said weapons were normal, baseball bats. Tony threw a PC at him once. There's a constant theme of dominance and ownership throughout it. And we seen in Kegan's interview, Kegan's interrogation, the investigators bring up an incident about a man beating a child. They lay out a story, they ask Kegan what he thinks should happen, and Kegan is, he should be hung right now. But that story is about Tony and Bart. That story is about Tony smashing Bart's head so hard into the toilet that he fractured his orbital socket. He smashed him into the toilet and he started dunking him up and down. He is a psychopath. We know what Tony is like. We know Tony was more than likely using the devices. Tony has asked some of Kegan's friends in the past, would they like a tag team with him and Kegan? He's a creep. He's vicious. There is a constant escalation throughout his life. We learned after all of this as well, people came out from his school days saying that he was creeping in the windows at them, sticking sticks in the windows and pulling up their skirts. Everything that I have said so far in this video is from court records or first-hand witness accounts. We know who Tony is. We know what Tony is. And he is 100%, in my opinion, capable of something like this. Is he involved? I don't know. But going back to some of the things we know about Tony, the control, the ownership that he imposes, do you really think if Kegan was involved and if Kegan knew what was going down or was even there that day, that Tony would stay home? I don't think so. He's a very visual person. He's violent. He's controlling. There's a big step back there. There's a big loss of control if you're not going to go. And yeah, you can kind of throw out there that, if there was some media recorded, that might be good enough for Tony. I don't believe so. It's only live once, and I don't think Tony would want to miss out on that. The screenshots that I'm going to use in this video are from an old video. Please go back and check them out. There's loads there in the playlist if you want to know a little bit more about Tony. Good luck, God bless. I hope everyone has a good day.